Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Headlines. We turn our attention tonight to perhaps one of the biggest threats to the 2027 election. So imagine it's 48 hours to election day. A WhatsApp voice note begins to spread. It sounds exactly like a presidential candidate insulting a particular ethnic group. Within minutes, it's on thousands of phones. Within hours, radio stations are discussing it. Social media is on fire. Tempers are rising and political camps are accusing each other. Then comes another video. This time, an INEC official appears to announce perhaps election results, except the official never said those words. The video is fake. But by the time the truth catches up, the damage has already been done. Now, this isn't science fiction anymore. According to a new report titled "The Algorithm and the Ballot Box," Nigeria is entering the 2027 elections with one of the biggest democratic threats we've never had to confront before. And it's not ballot box snatching or election violence, but artificial intelligence-powered misinformation. SBM Intelligence, an arm of SB Morgan, is a renowned African market and security intelligence firm, and it's come up with this report, which is, they say, provides some expert and research opinion into the behavior of Nigerians, especially with their relationship with AI as we count down to the big one in 2027. The report found that 66.5% of Nigerians are concerned that AI could be used to manipulate the 2027 elections, yet 52.1% now rely primarily on social media for political news, where AI-generated content spreads fastest. Perhaps its most striking finding came from the Southeast. There, we're told that 82.5% of respondents rely on social media for political information, and 42.7% rarely verify what they receive. It's the highest figures in the country. Only about 38.9% say they are concerned about AI interfering in the election, and that makes them the least worried geopolitical zone. So the big question tonight, could AI become the biggest invisible threat to Nigeria's democracy? And why is the region most exposed to online misinformation the least worried about AI? I'm joined tonight by David Ajikobi, who's Nigeria editor at Africa Check, which I believe collaborated with SBM Intelligence on this important report. David, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond the Headlines. Am I talking to David?
Yeah, talking to Ikemesit, actually.
To who?
Ikemesit Effiong.
Oh, Ikemesit Effiong.
Yes, managing partner.
Oh, with SBM. Oh, okay, so we got the big one. I got the wrong name earlier.
Okay.
And then you came quite late, so that's why we have the mix-up. It's all right. So SBM Intelligence is led by Cheta Nwaze, right? Yes. Who's the firm's lead partner. Yeah. And you serve as a partner and you oversee the research team. Yeah. We needed to establish that because this whole conversation is based on your data. And I think there was something I saw in that particular report where you mentioned that all the figures you have here is relevant as at May 2026, right? Yeah. Awesome. So perhaps the most startling finding in that report is what you call the Southeast paradox. 82.5% of respondents there rely on social media as their main source of political news, yet many of them do not verify. How do we explain that a region that appears to be most exposed to AI-driven misinformation is also least concerned about it?
Well, I think a part of it would probably dovetail on the fact that there is people tend to be locked into what they believe in. Okay. Right. Yeah, so there's a bit of confirmation bias that's probably,
so the opinion is already formed there.
Yeah, the opinion is already formed, and people are essentially consulting echo chambers, as it were, or looking for sources of information that reinforce,
that confirms exactly what they want to believe.
Yes, pre-existing notions. There's that. Secondly is that we need to do a better job, right, in the country around education around AI use and potential misuse. And this is not just a Southeast issue. This is just a general broad issue. It's not even just a Nigerian issue. It's a global issue, right? At this point, because the cost of using artificial intelligence and the barriers of entry, right, are actually quite low. It has increased access. The way we put it in the report was that we saw certain incidences where AI was used to spawn, right, deepfakes, create fake or inauthentic election results, right, in 2023. But, all of the large language models, the AI chatbots that we use, and all of these AI tools have grown in leaps and bounds, right, since 2023. So we see 2027 as Nigeria's first proper AI election. And a lot of the education around responsible AI use, right, is lagging actual, right, AI content generation. And we think in that gap, right, lies the potential for a serious potential destabilization of our
I
elections.
think that you hit the nail on the head about the pre-informed opinion. The fact that, and I'll give an example. People who support Tinubu would want to see a negative story from Peter Obi. And it's the same way the other, it's the same for those who support Peter Obi who would consume any negative news coming from the president. Do you think tech can fix that?
Well,
because people are even sourcing for information that fits their sentiment.
True. So, AI can be part of the solution if you have responsible actors and stakeholders, the media, for example, right? Fact-checking organizations and agencies, even government agencies, right? Chief amongst which, since we're talking about elections, would be INEC, can utilize these AI tools to create public education campaigns, right? To educate Nigerians on how to spot legitimate from, right? Legitimate content from deepfake. And one of the things that myself and, and David, right, my colleague, right, from Africa Check, have been saying in talking about this report, right, is that media organizations can create fact-checking segments.
We have one here,
right?
actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
we have an entire show built around that.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant, and that is not the norm, right? So we need to translate that, and especially to make those and to make those segments sort of native on social media, which is where a lot of this is. I mean, one of the findings from our report is that 52.1% of our respondents say social media is their primary source of news. So I love your show, I watch your show, I love the station, but a majority of Nigerians will probably consume this program on YouTube or Facebook.
And
right?
that's another contradiction that jumped out at me. Nationally, 66.5% of Nigerians say they're worried about AI-generated political misinformation. But like you said, you found that 52.1% now get their political news primarily from social media, which of course is AI, where AI-generated content spreads the fastest. So does this suggest that Nigerians understand the risk in theory, but they haven't really changed the way they consume political information?
That's correct, right, yeah. So the levels of fact-checking, either through consuming other forms of media, whether it's television or radio, or checking in with trusted ones in their trusted ones within their circles, whether it's family or friends, or recourse to community leaders, whether it's religious or institutional, right, organizations of states. All of those figures right across the country are low. There are some geopolitical zones that obviously underperform relative to the rest of the country. So it does presuppose that Nigerians have an awareness of AI. Nigerians increasingly understand and can see what content is AI generated, right? And that's where that concern stems from. But the concern seems to stay there. People often don't go out of their way to double check or fact check, right, information. So the just recently concluded off-cycle elections that we saw in Ekiti, so we saw, right, an outbreak, right, of announcements before result announcements were made, right, generated voice notes, generated messages and text, right, that was circulating right about social media.
Is there a sense to which much of this mischief is with the consumer, him or herself? Because my 8-year-old would see a video on YouTube and say, Dad, is that AI or not? So why would any average Nigerian in 2026 today just rapidly consume any content they see online without first attempting to verify it?
So first and foremost, you can only really limit exposure. You cannot eliminate exposure to AI. A lot of the content is fed algorithmically, right? So just in the course of being a digital native, you're going to happen on AI content. I think the key thing is to do a lot more education around helping people spot AI information, more importantly, spot AI misinformation, but also have a very good sense of media literacy, just more broadly speaking, because you could have a situation where you do recognize that content is AI. You may recognize that this content may somewhat be feeding your confirmation bias, but you don't have the broad media literacy skill, right, to recognize, okay, I need to situate this within the context of, and because again, there aren't a lot of shows like yours on television that do contextual journalism. So we're often reporting incidents from day to day to day to day to day, and very few people are situating a development that occurred today within the broad context of how that particular issue has evolved over the last 3 to 6 months, right? And let's be honest, right? Nigerians have a lot going on. You've got to go to work, we've got families to fend for, right? And the likes. And it does take a certain level of privilege to go out of your way to try to figure out if what you're consuming right now is either legitimate or the likes, which is why with our reports and a lot of the recommendations in our reports focus less on the consumer side of things and more on the institutional stakeholder side of things in terms of creating the right tool and deepening awareness of those tools so that we can then help the consumers do this, you know, in a more low-cost manner.
We'll talk about these tools very shortly. Your report says WhatsApp is used by more than 95% of Nigerian internet users, yet it has virtually no AI detection capability because of the end-to-end encryption, and at the same time, AI moderation on other platforms struggles with Nigerian languages. Are tech companies effectively leaving Nigeria to fight this battle alone?
Yes, and I would argue that they are not just doing this in Nigeria, but they are doing this globally. One of the unhelpful net effects, right, of end-to-end encryption for all of its positives, and this is not me not being an advocate, right, of privacy online, is that it's difficult, right, for content platforms to be able to appropriately moderate content if they don't have a view of what that content is, unless it is reported by users, which again, a lot of these platforms, I think WhatsApp is working on one, but there are rudimentary spam and blockage and harassment reporting mechanisms that exist right now on WhatsApp that you can use if you want to spotlight problematic content. But, and this is where we come back to awareness. A lot of those tools, right, the average WhatsApp user in Nigeria either isn't aware of them, they haven't tried using them, and they've not been incentivized by the platforms to consider using them. So a big area of development, right, which would help us, especially in the lead up to the elections, would be if content platforms, right, highlight those reporting mechanisms that already exist, but also evolve new ones. There's an interesting bit, and we do know anecdotally from experience that when Nigerians have an awareness and have access to fact-checking tools or to content moderation tools, they're more than happy to use them. If you are a heavy X user, for example, then you're very familiar with Nigerian X users asking Grok AI to fact-check and verify, right?
It's just that you have to be certified to use it.
There is that too.
And you must have paid X to be able to have access to that tech.
Yeah, there is that too. And this is where engagement on the part of government can help, where it would be ideal if we could have this as part of the terms of service of using the platform, but at the very least for the purposes of the elections, having a conversation with the platforms to allow broad access, right, to those sort of AI and fact-checking and content moderation tools so that Nigerian users can use that to have a sense of what's legitimate and what's not on this platform.
The research identifies what it describes as data boys, WhatsApp broadcast coordinators, paid influencers, and AI-assisted online platforms driving political misinformation. You know, the layman might think it's just an uninformed user of WhatsApp who is peddling this thing. Are you suggesting that disinformation has become a full-fledged political industry with AI simply making it cheaper, faster, and more convincing?
Yeah, that's what we are asserting. And in this regard, right, AI and other digital tools are standing on the back of a long tradition of broadcast media, radio and television, the early internet, but also the internet pre-AI, representing tools that political actors have used to try to get their messages and to try to get their narratives, right, to the average voter. So in that sense, artificial intelligence is not unique, right? It's just an evolution on behavior that's, existed from time immemorial. What's different, though, with AI is that AI just supercharges reach, access, but also creation. Like you said, the cost of content creation now has dropped basically to the cost of a data bundle,
Indeed.
right? In that respect. And you also have a situation where such information reinforces already existing bias around mistrust in institutions, around mistrust in particular candidates, or overwhelming trust, right, in another candidate, right, then people are more likely to reshare and, by extension, amplify those content pipelines. And so in that sense, what AI can do is AI will do two critical things in this respect. And we gave out 5 scenarios, but let's just talk about 2. It will obviously decrease the cost of content creation. But then also in a situation where lots of voters and lots of social media consumers feel as though there is a preponderance or the share of AI content is just so high or so overwhelming, right? Then we have a scenario called the liar's dividend, which builds where everyone is skeptical about all sorts of evidence, including legitimate evidence. And that also creates its own issues, because in that case, how do people like you, the media, for example, ensure that serious, often expensive, responsible journalism is consumed and is trusted by the Nigerian voter in an environment where everyone mistrusts what their eyes sees, what their ears hear, and what they are reading? So
I'd like us to break this down, because I have a feeling we're speaking too much grammar. So if I receive a sensational voice note, for instance, or video about a presidential candidate just days before the election, what are the 3 things every Nigerian should do before believing it or even forwarding it to other groups?
Okay. I wish my colleague David at Africa Check, right, was here. But as someone who actually has to do this, because I also look at Nigerian politics, right, for a living, the first thing is this the only source of that information? That's the first question. So, the tried and tested journalistic tools of who, what, why, whom, where, right? Apply those to that scenario. Is this the only source of reporting? What's the hidden subtext, or what is this particular piece of information, right, trying to accomplish? 3, is it sensational? Is it too good to be true? Is it astounding? Is it out of character, right, for the individual or the institution, say a political party or a political party candidate? Is this generally out of character with what is generally known, right, about this candidate? If there are important red flags or important question marks, right, around those 3 responses, then that's probably content that has been generated to elicit a reaction, often an emotional reaction, and you should probably pause and try to consult other sources, right, of information. The way I like to talk about this, right, in more general circles outside of, say, my media or my political research friends, is that if you are a driver or a nurse or a teacher or someone who doesn't have outsized exposure, say, to politics or the elections or to political candidates, and something drops on a WhatsApp group of, say, your secondary school or your university classmates, and you've not seen it everywhere, you're not a political journalist. Nobody really has an incentive to share potential breaking news with you. There's a very high likelihood that that's content was specifically generated, right, in order to affect you in a way that would be advantageous to someone else. You're not going to break news. So why is this dropping on a platform, which is generally a closed platform? And again, it's a platform that may not be created for the purpose of, of politics or discussing the elections, right, or the like. So those are some of the contexts. Very practical example, a video pops up on a WhatsApp group and it shows the Wole Soyinka, right, Center for the Arts, right, on fire, and you live in Surulere, right? All you need to do is just walk outside and see, right, if from your vantage point there are flames or there is an indication that there's a fire
short, you're saying
going on.
The first reaction to every news pop you get is suspicion.
Context.
Right.
Be healthily skeptical, right, about it. Also, do not feel the impulse to share as a matter of course. Lots of people reacted strongly to the time when X, when it was still under its old guise as Twitter, created this mechanism where if you tried to retweet a link to a story that you haven't read, it will prompt you, right? Yeah. So, and I think what that spoke to is just the fact that people are more likely to share sensational content without actually taking a step
Add to the
back.
fact that everybody's a content creator now, and the platforms are paying them, so they need to push out stories that, with clickbait, so that they can earn some more money from Facebook, X, and what have you. But I want us to also speak to, the opinions, and that's where we started from, because every news consumer has a bias as we count down to 2027. There are some people who would never vote for a candidate and who would want every other person to be impacted by that. How do you convince them to do the needful before sharing such information?
The thing with bias is to first recognize it. Yeah, and I think that's critical. Anyone who goes into a conversation, right, by insisting that their own bias is fundamentally, right, biased in that sense, I generally do not have a problem with political speech as long as you are fine dealing with counter narratives or being pushed back or having your assumptions challenged. The real danger with a lot of AI generated political content is that it's so engineered to stir up your emotions, right, either positively or negatively, right, in favor of issues or candidates, right, or the likes, that it often strips away from the conversation. Very little context and a historical view of narrative, right, is brought into play. So oftentimes, right, it would be of, and this is where, think of it like vaccination. Not every member of the population, right, necessarily needs to be vaccinated in order for herd immunity, right, to kick in. As long as you either go out of your way to step out of your echo chambers, which most people won't do, but if you already exist, families are often diverse, class groups, work environments and employer-employee environments, company environments are often diverse, right? That you would often find someone whose political perspective isn't yours. As far as you're willing to at least consider the other side, you're generally right on safe ground. And I also think there's something to be said around, media stakeholders and also fact-checking institutions, not also communicating in a dry or in an intellectual or in an academic manner. We're not necessarily saying be sensationalist, but communicate
in a way that resonates.
In a way that will resonate.
Absolutely.
That's also important.
We have completely run out of time, right? But I know that many of our laws came before AI and deepfakes, and perhaps you might need to push this document to lawmakers and see what we can do in that regard. It's a developing conversation, and I want to say, Ikemesit Effiong, thank you so much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure.
On the show today. He's a partner with SBM Intelligence and oversees the research team that came up with this particular report. That's our show today, everyone. Remember, you can watch it again at midnight and 6 a.m. tomorrow. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. See you again soon.